Hello and welcome to today's Association for Manufacturing Excellence webinar titled Value Stream Mapping for Office and Service. I'm Judy Zarnick, Membership Manager for AME. Today's presenter is Drew Locker. Drew is a 4-time author and 2-time Shingo Prize recipient. His works include The Complete Lean Enterprise, Value Stream Mapping for Office and Service, the go-to reference on the subject. He has been applying enterprise excellence concepts to office and service environments for over 25 years, including financial institutions, hospitality, healthcare, engineering, and the back office of manufacturers. Drew is an instructor for the University of Michigan's Lean Leadership and Kata programs, as well as a faculty member of the Lean Enterprise Institute. Before we begin, just a couple of items. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording for playback. You will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the questions area of the attendee panel and click submit. We'll review the questions at the end of today's presentation and answer as many as we can. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Drew Locker, who will present Value Stream Mapping for Office and Service. Take it away, Drew.
Thank you, Judy, and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar on a topic that I have a great passion for, value stream mapping as applied to office and service environments. So let's get started. Just this first slide has a few photos, and I'm going to make emphasis of a few tips on how we value stream map in office and service environments. I want to, highlight the photo on the left. When we map, we start off in a conference room and, where we put the paper up on the board. You'll see that in the photo on the right. But we don't want to just confine ourselves to the room. We want to actually go see, walk the flow. And that's the photo on the left. You can see a mapping team listening intently to someone in their cubicle where they're doing a particular step or process within the value stream. We're making notes, collecting data. My hope is that everyone takes this approach to the application of this methodology. We don't just confine ourselves to meeting rooms or conference rooms. That's an important tip that I'll highlight later in the webinar. So let's just start off. I don't know what everyone's background is on the topic, but what is a value stream? So defined by Jim Womack and Dan Jones in their Lean Thinking book, back around 1997, they defined 3 primary value streams. The physical transformation of raw material to finished product, that is the manufacturing value stream, or the value streams that most manufacturers have. There's problem solving. The market has a problem, you design a solution. Organizations that are involved in design or engineering activities, that would be their value stream. And then there's information management, and that's pretty much what you would find in most office and service environments. Now you look at this list of processes: quoting, order processing, purchasing, hiring, and so on. One of the things we have to try to emphasize is a value stream is a series of interrelated processes that make up the value stream, what we call a value stream these days, to deliver a product or a service to a customer. So when you look at this list, they really, several of these are interrelated. So like, it's not just quoting, but I turn a quote into an order, which in turn, or at some point in time, I go and ship that order. Then I receive my, the money, or I invoice and then receive the money on it. So it's really those 4 or 5 processes that make up a value stream. And I could kind of repeat the same thought process for purchasing. We would say from requisition to pay, that's the value stream. So I encounter some confusion of what a value stream is, particularly in office and service environments. There's a tendency to kind of look very narrowly at a very specific process and not recognizing that that process is part of a chain of processes that make up a value stream. Some are value streams on their own, like the hiring process, from identifying a need to going through the selecting and interviewing process, the onboarding process. We usually take that value stream to the person's been on the job for maybe 90 days and has exhibited the, the abilities to perform the duties expected of them. All right, so some office processes are in and of themselves their own value stream. Okay. The use of this tool, it's one of several methodologies of improvement. And, we have a multitude of methodologies, and this is one of them. They're all based on Plan, Do, Check, Act, Emmons, time tested improvement methodology, also referred to as PDCA. Now we use this methodology for radical system level improvement. Radical system level improvement. Toyota has a term for that, and I probably am going to pronounce it incorrectly, kaikaku. There are other types of improvements, small incremental process level improvements. They would use the term Kaizen for. Most people are familiar with that term. What we're after with value stream mapping is radical system level improvement. Systems, again, these interrelated processes, cutting across multiple functions and departments, and then radical improvement. Things like 50% reductions in lead time, 50% improvement in quality performance or customer service. Those kind of levels of improvement are what we're after with value stream mapping. If you want to just make incremental improvement, you can use the other methodologies of improvement. You do not have to use value stream mapping for that. The other benefit of value stream mapping that I like to point out is the social implications. It is a strong, strong collaborative tool. So when I'm having conversations with organizations and they're describing some of their problems, maybe differences of opinion between departments, or maybe even stronger dysfunctional behaviors, I'm thinking of the application of value streams or value stream mapping. Let's get them together working on a common objective that affects all of them, and we can realize the strong collaborative benefits of value stream mapping. It never surprises me, the impact of that. I've done a few mapping events just the last few weeks, and remarkable how, just in a 3-day event, how different groups having pretty strong opinions and pretty noticeable conflict between them. By the end of the 3 days, we're really working together to common objectives, having a greater appreciation of what each other's do, because they're like been literally, not literally, but figuratively standing in each other's shoes for those 3 days, learning from each other, learning the difficulties and challenges that others in the value stream are experiencing, and just having that understanding and appreciation helps overcome these conflicts that can occur in organizations between departments and functions. So it's a very strong collaborative tool. We use this again for radical system design. So it helps us visualize work as a system. And if you know Steven Spear, he referred to this as the DNA of lean, activities, pathways, and linkages. And that's exactly what we visualize in a value stream map. We've got our activities or the process boxes. We follow the flow of the information or the service, the pathways. And then we talk about the linkages, how well these processes and the people involved in the value stream, how well they're working together or not working together. We can find problems from a system perspective. Where we find the problem might be very different point in the value stream where they originate. And it's an enabling tool. It helps answer the most basic questions like, where should we begin with our lean effort in a particular system or value stream? What typical benefits might we achieve? This tool helps with all of that. It can really provide a direction for groups of people or even an entire organization on how to improve the complex systems within their organizations. Like any methodology, it has its application, and we don't want to misapply it, which I've seen in my travels. So it's not really meant to solve a specific problem or, be applied to a specific function or department, but rather the information or service flows that cut across multiple functions or departments. And this is important to properly apply the tool, because if you don't, generally what happens is the team has a negative experience with the use of the methodology, and humans in general don't want to repeat negative experiences. So I've had organizations where they go crazy with value stream mapping or any of the lean methodologies. We got to do a value stream map for everything, or we set certain kind of silly objectives like everyone must do 4 value stream maps a year, and those kind of things usually lend to the misapplication of this very powerful methodology, which can in turn result in a kind of a negative experience for folks, because it just wasn't meant to be applied to certain situations. The key is radical system improvement, and in other words, we got to improve the overall system or value stream, which once again is made up of a series of processes interrelated that tend to be performed by multiple functions and departments. And when we bring that cross-functional team together to learn how the value stream operates today, currently, and how to redesign it, we need people to put what I call the big hat on. They've got to be open to change that is going to benefit the overall whole, not just their part of it. So it's very common for departments or functions or people within those to kind of get, turf protection and turf rejection and do what's best for them, but not necessarily what is best for the overall whole. So like 2 weeks ago, applying this concept to a higher ed institution, there was 2 groups that were a lot of conflict walking into the exercise. And, as much as I said, hey, you got to put your big hat on, the one group took that in that spirit and said, hey, we need to do more up front, so that helps the downstream process. So they actually took on more work, which would be like, oh no. But they understood that they needed to do that. It was the right thing to do, is what they said. So that's what we're after, trying to improve the overall whole, not single processes within. We've learned years ago that you could do process improvement, but if it's not in the context of what is right for the overall whole, you may create problems. You may sub-optimize. You may create other problems. We probably have all in our careers have experienced this, where well-intended changes in one department or process had a negative effect on others. Well, why does that happen? Because we're just not seeing the entire system, or what today people are calling value streams. The tool itself was first applied, at least in the value stream term context. Some of us have been doing these in all environments for decades now. But the original text on the subject, Learning to See, from John Shook and Mike Rother, showed how to apply this in manufacturing environments. To go apply this to office and services, there are some differences. For example, there's not a lot of data that exists. In manufacturing, there tends to be a lot of data, not all necessarily the right data, but in office and service environments, very often we don't have the data. And for those of you who have value stream mapped in the past, we apply data to the map. Probably one of the biggest distinctions from classic process mapping. Very often, the office and service value stream is not well defined currently, and that just means we're going to have to spend a little more time laying out the value stream and the process boxes within it. There tends to be a lot more multitasking going on. In other words, the people in an office and service environment tend to be supporting maybe multiple value streams, or at least multitasking in general. That makes this a little more difficult, because you don't map functions or departments. Again, you map the information flows or the service flows. In some environments, particularly offices, not so much service, you don't have that line of sight with the customer and what the customer values. So that is a challenge that we have to overcome by maybe involving the customer in the value stream mapping exercise, maybe gathering data that represents voice of the customer, certainly having people on the mapping team that represent that customer interface, so we don't lose sight of the voice of the customer. And of course, as many of you probably know, waste in manufacturing is much more physical. You can see it, you can count it, trip over it. In office and service, waste is much more entrenched and hidden. But to that point, I would say all the more reason to do value stream mapping, because with its icons and with the data, it will make the waste much more visible. So yes, the office and service is different, but that shouldn't, prevent us from applying this powerful methodology. Now, we don't wake up in the morning and say, let's go map things. Again, when we're after radical system improvement, this is a big undertaking. So there should be a discussion of why we're going to map what we want to map. And that usually should be aligned with kind of the strategy and direction of the business. Where's the business want to go, and what key value streams do we need to relook at or redesign to help us affect that strategy and move in that direction. So we want to choose wisely. So I can say for about 50% of the time when organizations reach out to me and say, I want you to help us with value stream mapping, process A, through a discussion of what their business needs are, what their strategic direction is. About 50% of the time, we end up mapping something else. Maybe not altogether different, but maybe an extension of what they were thinking. So we should always tie such major undertakings to the business needs. We also discuss, before mapping anything, what are the specific performance goals or targets. These become the key design parameters for the future state, which we'll talk about later in the webinar. Because there's a lot of variability in office and service environments, we often have to have a discussion about product or service families. And this simplified example, people will tell us there's a lot of variations in what we do. In this example, we're just talking about maybe quoting, including designing, and then entering an order and delivering on that order. And even in this kind of value stream, there could be standard products or services that we just take the order and deliver on it. But there could be custom product or services where there's some designing and quoting activity, and then hopefully we get the order and deliver on it. So we have to have this conversation ahead of time to help us understand what is it we want to map. Like in this example, do we want to map the standard type of product or service, or the custom standard product or service? And that discussion could lead us to which is more important to our strategy, where are we having bigger problems. But we got to be clear on what the bounds are of the map and what processes are going to be included. And you can kind of repeat this little analysis and conversation with anything, like the hiring process. Who am I hiring? Am I hiring the CEO? Am I hiring hourly associates? The odds are the process steps will be quite different, and the needs of the organization will be quite different. Procurement, what am I buying? Multi-million-dollar pieces of capital equipment, or office supplies or shop supplies? Again, the processing steps will be quite different, and the needs of the organization will be quite different. And we have to have this conversation so we can know what we're mapping, what will be included on the map, what won't be included on the map. This helps to, one, define who the team members should be, but also helps us, kind of scope out the undertaking. So we're not spinning our wheels when we begin the mapping exercise. So this is always an important conversation before we start mapping anything. Uh-oh. There we go. The process that we use for the methodology is as follows. There's prep work that goes on. This typically happens 3 to 4 weeks ahead of time. Then we do a current state map, a future state map, and then a plan to get there. And we do that typically in 2 to 4 days, depending on the complexity of the mapping exercise, of the value stream that we're mapping, and or the experience of the team. If you notice on the right, you'll see at each stage, agreeing. And this kind of emphasizes the collaborative nature of this methodology. Just to kind of lay out a actual map and the icons, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, like any mapping tool, there's a language to it. The icons perform a language or provide a language. And in this particular case, the icons help us have eyes for flow and eyes for waste. And not just the icons, but the data that is included on the map, as you see here. So I think you can see my cursor. This is the Bart Simpson icon. It looks like Bart Simpson's head. It's an outside resource icon, kind of represent customers, suppliers. We use that icon to distinguish what we do versus what we depend on other organizations to do. But it should have a data box under it. In this case, it could be lead time expectations of the customer, the demand or volume of work from customers, maybe some quality metrics, how well we're doing in fulfilling customer quality expectations. We have our process boxes like set up customers, schedule service, make an appointment, and so on. Kind of higher level. In each of those boxes, we could drill down and have step by step, but with value stream mapping, I kind of use the term, it's like a 10,000 foot view. We don't have to put all the detail on the map. We're going to see the detail when we do the current state map during what I call show and tell, which we'll get to. Underneath each process box is a data box that relates to the process box above it. And, this is simplified example, PT, process time, how long does it take to do things, like in minutes, maybe hours. CNA, a measure of information quality, completeness, and accuracy. I could have complete information that's inaccurate, or I could have missing, incomplete information. Number of people, the little, it's like Cyclops with a smiley face, and maybe noting what department they work in this case, CS, customer service. What tools are they using, like the business system or a spreadsheet. Things like lead time, how long things sit in queue or how long things take us to do. Like in the make appointment process box, it's a 10-minute task, but we start and stop and start and stop. And that 10-minute task extends to a whole day, a lead time of a day, and so on. We got waiting icons, we have iteration icons. We have our rectangular icon, which is the information that we're passing from step to step. And then in the lower right-hand corner, we have our summary metrics. Typical ones are overall lead time, that we may have several expressions of those, and overall process time. And once again, we might have several expressions of those. First pass yield is a summary metric of the quality performance of the value stream, really a measure of correction waste. And you can have other summary metrics as well. So the icons, again, help us get eyes for flow and eyes for waste. These are the most commonly used ones. Some people will create their own. Like years ago, people created the wait time one. Used to maybe show wait time, waiting for customers to respond, or approvals to kind of really highlight those. So you can make up your own icons. Just be clear on what their meaning is, and the people that you're working with, that they're clear on what those meanings are. Some tips, very important, getting the right level of detail. So as I said, eyes for flow and eyes for waste, but that doesn't mean we want to highlight every stoppage of flow or every waste. That might sound counter to lean, but we're after a bigger game with value stream mapping. So we want to see stoppages of flow of significance. Well, what makes it significant? It's really time. So if I have an overall lead time for a service and it's say 10 days, I probably don't care about stoppages of flow of minutes, but maybe hours. Same thing with waste. What are the key wastes? That's what we're after. Because of the variability in office and service environments, there's nothing wrong with expressing the data in ranges. Just be careful of outliers. When you ask people, what is the range of, say, a process time for a particular process step, there's a tendency to maybe over-exaggerate the high side. So, just be a little careful of outliers. Ideally, we get this data through direct observation, or we collected it prior to the mapping event. Because as I said earlier, this data is not usually readily available. You want to map together as a team. I've seen people break it up amongst individuals. You map this step, you map that step. Then you don't get the collaboration that benefits that I was describing earlier. And I made a quick mention earlier of show and tell. This is where you see the detail. You don't just map up on a wall and people verbally describing what they do. They have to show the work. So if we can't go to their office or their cubicle or go to wherever the service is delivered, that's the ideal, and see the work being performed, we do the next best thing. We have people kind of on their computers projecting up on a television monitor where we all can see, maybe in a conference room, but they're doing the work. They're showing us how they do it. Very, very important to not just tell what you're doing, and how you're doing it, but show the work. It engages more senses. It generates richer conversations, more questions. And I see this not always happening with people applying this methodology. In designing the future state, to me, this is the real key and the power of the tool. People have been mapping for years of some form. Maybe they haven't been using these icons. Maybe they have, or maybe they haven't been putting data on their maps. But to me, the real key and benefit of this methodology is, what are you going to do with this current state? How are you going to redesign it based on lean principles? So again, prior to the exercise, we would have the goals predetermined. Are we trying to reduce lead time? Are we trying to improve service? All the above. That needs to be thought out ahead of time and defined, because those become the design parameters for the future state. What we are not trying to do is a waste war. And I see this over and over again, how people are applying this tool. They'll take the current state and just bring, everyone gets a chance and identifies waste, and there's 100 in these complex systems and value streams. There could be 100 wastes. That is not what we're after. And I know that might sound shocking to some people on a webinar now, but that is not what we're after. We're after the key wastes that are keeping us from meeting these goals that we've established. It's not drive-by Kaizen, kamikaze Kaizen. It's not that. It's a thoughtful redesign of the current state based on lean principles to meet predetermined objectives for the future state. And when people take this approach of 100, ideas for improvement, who's got the time and resources to do 100 things? We just want to work on 6, 8, 10 really important things, major initiatives, and significantly move the needle in terms of performance. So that's a big point I'd like to make, because I see this over and over again. People kind of using this tool to identify hundreds of wastes. Frankly, you don't need value stream mapping. You can just do a waste walk and find those. So we want to be directed in our improvement. Okay. So in the graphic below, it could be 100 things, but what are the key things we have to really focus on to meet our business objectives for this value stream that we're redesigning? Also, we want to have a reasonable future state, that we have a reasonable chance of implementing in a reasonable time frame. So we typically look maybe 6 months, no longer than a year out. And even if we do look 6 months or a year out, we want to make sure that there's elements of the future state we can implement within 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, and so on. We're not creating future states that are going to take multiple years to implement, with rare exception to that, what I just said, because things change. And by the way, people are probably going to lose momentum and enthusiasm. The other thing that people have to recognize is we do not have and will not have 100% certainty of whatever we come up with the future state. And uncertainty is okay. There's going to be ideas that the team comes up with that when we get into it and really look into it later, after we did the mapping exercise, we find out it was a bad idea. That's okay. We get the team back together. We maybe come up with different ideas, update the map, update the plan, and move forward. It could be ideas we didn't come up with during the exercise. It comes to someone's mind later. And once again, we get the people together, we update the map, update the plan, and move forward. So when people are coming up with ideas and they're not certain, I say, hey, do you feel you have a 70% chance to implement that idea in the next 3 months? Well, no. How about 3 to 6? Yes. Then we will assume that in the future state. Frankly, I do not do ideal states. I know some people do. I will do it once in a while just to stimulate ideas from people if the team is not coming up with their own ideas. But I don't run into that too often. Once we set the goals or objectives, that stimulates the innovative process of designing the future state, the creative process of designing the future state. So I can't even remember the last time I had to revert to doing an ideal state to really get people out of their box and get innovative with their thinking. Now, this is a thoughtful process that we go through to design the future state. And we use a set of future state questions. And this is another gap I will often see in the application, the practice of value stream mapping. I'll ask people, well, are you using the future state questions to design the future states? And they look at me puzzled. And this is the key. This list of questions represents the key concepts of lean, and we can use these and apply these to any value stream to redesign them. For those of you that are familiar with the Learning to See book for manufacturing value stream mapping, there's a different set of questions. These my co-author and I have used over many years, decades now, to apply, the wording and all are more conducive to office and service environments. The underlying principles are the same. Like the first question, what does the customer really need, right? Lean is customer focus. We want to start off with this question. Which steps create value and which are waste? Everyone likes to focus on waste, but, as I'll say on a subsequent slide, focus on the key waste. The next question, how do we flow work with fewer interruptions? Flow is a key concept of lean. Where we can't flow, we have interruptions. If you're familiar with the term pull, how are we going to control? We use that to control interruptions in flow. Flow is the ideal, pull is the next best thing. And that's what the fourth question represents. The whole idea of leveling is another higher order lean concept. And that's kind of captured in our how will workload and/or activities be leveled. And the second, third, fourth, and fifth question help us redesign the flow of the information or the service or both. The next question is how we manage the new process. We've learned over the years, excuse me, it's insufficient to change the workflow. We also have to change the manner in which that value stream is managed. This is very, very important. If we don't change the way it's managed, there's going to be a tendency to kind of go back to the old known and the current state. And then last is the question, what process improvements will be necessary? This is not a catch-all. In practice, the answer to the last question should have come out of discussions of the earlier questions. But usually what I use this question for is just anything of significance that we may have overlooked. So getting a little more detail into each of these, What does the customer really need? It's really a multi-part question. We might be designing for specific response time or turnaround time and expected quality level of the service or the output in general. More and more folks are familiar with the term service levels. And these would have been defined prior to the mapping exercise. So what I use this question is to remind everyone, this is what we're designing for. We're also looking to the future. We might have a discussion of, is the demand expected to go up or down or be flat? We must, consider that in the design of our future state. We can't design a future state with assumptions of current demand if in the future it's going to increase in some significant way. Variation in demand, some discussion of that. Very fundamentally, this leads to a discussion about, do we have the right resources in the right place in the value stream to meet future demand? Which steps create value, which are waste? I'm thinking about rewording this one, because really what we're after, what are the key wastes? What are the key wastes that are obstacles to us meeting the predefined business objectives? So we're not trying to address all the waste, just the key ones. It's about quality, not quantity. And we don't, we want to avoid that drive-by or kamikaze Kaizen approach that I've seen people take. The answer to this question usually is very apparent on the current state with the icons and the data that's on the map. It'll pop which the really key ones are. And frankly, for office and service, usually the mother of all waste is correction waste. Where in manufacturing, it's like overproduction. In office and service, it tends to be the correction waste. How can we flow work with few interruptions? We have several options here. We can try to apply, or at least see if they apply. In the graphic in the upper left-hand of this slide, it shows the process steps, 1, 2, and 3, and handoffs. And every time you have a handoff, you have the potential for a queue. And the inbox is our queue icon. The right-hand side represents where maybe we can combine those steps to one person doing them, take the handoffs out, take the potential for queues out, get better flow, reduce lead time, maybe even better quality. Now, when we do this, we have to then replicate maybe the same approach over 2 or 3 people in order to have the right resources to meet the demand for the future state. But combining steps is a concept of flow. Sometimes you can't really combine the steps, and we do in the lower right-hand corner, the graphic, it's what I call a single team, single process concept, where we bring people together to produce the service, produce the information in a lot less lead time, but it's still, the work is still divided among several people, but they're working together as a team. Excuse me. And sometimes you can do combinations of these. The third option is concurrency or parallel processing. We ran into this last week, I believe, where I was. The opportunity to kind of take some of these processes and do them sooner without causing other problems, which can happen. Not all work lends itself to parallel processing or concurrent processing, but when it can, that it's a concept of flow because it can result in reduced lead time. Very often we will see batching going on in the current state. Batching happens in office and services. It takes a little different form. It's usually the frequency that we do things. And if I'm doing something once a week, a particular activity, that means the work could queue up for as much as a week before I process it and move it on to the next step. And we would challenge that because that is an impediment to flow. The batching is an impediment to flow. And we have to, speak to people, understand why they're batching currently, get agreement they can do things more frequently. Very often it's just their choice. They just have these routines that they've become accustomed to over the years. So we want to challenge that because batching is an impediment to flow. Where we do have interruptions in flow and we can't determine how to flow through it, at certain points of the value stream, we know in the future state these queues are going to form. This question is, how are we going to control those? You control the flow to and from the queue, and as a result, you control the queue. And what we're trying to do here is avoid this accordion effect, where the queue can grow uncontrollably, or in some cases, we don't want it to run dry either, perhaps. So this is where a pull system can be applied. For those of you that are familiar with pull systems, perhaps you never thought of their application to office and service environments, but they can. With any pull system, even in manufacturing, the elements are the same. Visibility of the queue of work, putting limits on the queue, defining the rules when the limits are met. So if I hit a maximum queue, what do I do? Probably stop. If I hit a minimum, what do I do? Replenish. And then we want to execute these pull systems through visual signals that are worker managed. If you're familiar with the word Kanban, that's the visual signal. And we want the people closest to the work making these decisions. I've always viewed pull systems as really a decision system. It tells us what to work on, what to do, what not to do, and we can set these up. When things do queue up also, it's an opportunity for people to kind of pick and choose the work, and that can be an issue. We have often seen people have different rules of priorities through a value stream, and that can be an impediment to flow. So we want to get agreement on what are the prioritization rules wherever queues form. Leveling is a deep concept of lean, and there's two aspects of it. There's the volume or demand leveling, and then the mix. So we talk about volume variation. Is there anything we can do about it? In some office and service environments, the unleveled demand is actually self-created, at least to some degree. And maybe we can come up with some ideas for the future state to kind of reduce some of that unlevelness. The mix, when we design the future state, this kind of gets back to the service families, the variations. We might have to tweak the future state design in a way to accommodate different variations. Maybe not every variation that can happen, but the more frequent ones. So we can design a more robust system that can accommodate the variations in the services or the information that's flowing. Again, we redesign the workflow. Now we have to talk about how we're going to manage this process in a different way. So what frequency are we going to review performance of the process? Maybe daily, sometimes near real time. Usually no less than once a week. It depends on what process we're redesigning. How are we going to manage it? How are we going to know how things are going? This is where visual management can be a great tool to apply here and make it easier to monitor the performance, manage it over time. And then even beyond that, how do we continually engage the team members in the value stream to drive continuous improvement? Because it's really not about implementing a future state. It's about implementing the future state and then continuously improving on that over time. So how's that going to happen? These are major elements of a management system, maybe part of what you might call a lean management system. So we start having those conversations, how we're going to manage this value stream differently going forward. Once again, the last question is not a catch-all. We would have identified a lot of these through the discussion of the earlier questions, but we may have missed one or two things at this point, and we would make sure we get those. This is our Kaizen lightning burst icon that we would put up on the future state. These are the things that we're going to go do to make that future state a reality. And you should have a future state map with some exception. A couple weeks ago, we ran out of time. There's just too much uncertainty. So I said, you know what, we're going to come back and once you folks get a little more information, then we'll do a proper future state map. So this was at a kind of a higher ed institution that they're very new to all this, and it was just going to be a struggle to put a future state together at that point in time. But we'll do it within a few weeks. Achieving the future state's a real goal, right? We can do maps and that doesn't really get us anywhere. And what you really want to do is PDCA your way to the future, right? Which means that the future state map itself is not cast in stone. We're going to learn as we go. We're going to learn, as I mentioned before, some assumptions or bad assumptions, some new ideas pop up. For all of the Kaizen bursts, the improvements that the team agrees on, we want to approach them in the spirit of Deming's PDCA and the spirit of experimentation that Deming always saw in his PDCA improvement cycle. So we want to kind of do small scale kind of experiments with ideas. I see, particularly in these large institutions I've been working with recently, a tendency to go from P to A, plan to act and make standard. Roll it out through the whole institution. I'm like, no. Here's an idea. Where can we experiment with it in the do? That's what the do is. It's an experiment. And then let's learn from that and then adjust accordingly if we need to, and then roll it out and act to make standard. So we kind of, PDCA is a learning cycle and we want to kind of learn our way to the future state, okay? It can be a little overwhelming. Again, we're looking for maybe 8, 10, 12, no more than that, major efforts that we are going to undertake to make this future state a reality. If you've got a list of 2 dozen, 3 dozen, odds are you're getting, going down that drive-by Kaizen approach. So with this finite list, we want to prioritize a bit. And here's just some general guidelines. These two are not cast in stone. If we can eliminate some non-value added quickly, which usually means not requiring IT help, because most organizations' IT groups, with rare exceptions, they tend to be already very, very busy. I said earlier, the mother of all waste and information and service value streams tends to be correction waste. In other words, the information quality isn't quite right. So almost always we're trying to address that. And we can get a lot of benefit of flow as a result of that, because that poor information quality or service quality is impeding flow. Very often in the early value future state maps, we see a lot of variability due to a lack of standard work. So maybe we can, apply those concepts and tools at key points of the future state. Sometimes we improve the flow, reducing handoffs, combining steps, maybe do things concurrently, maybe a teaming approach or a combination of all that. And usually we don't need any IT support to make those kind of changes. Maybe there's things our IT folks can do for us in the short term to help simplify some things. What we want to stay away from is the big IT solutions. They tend to take very long. Doesn't mean we don't need to, get new computer systems and stuff, but what are we going to do to help people in the short term is what I always ask. In complex value streams, it can be overwhelming, so we define loops. My co-author calls them chunks, segments of the future state that we can kind of prioritize and focus on, and then over time implement the future state in its entirety over, say, the 6, 9, 12-month period. So albeit a brief discussion of the topic, but that kind of wraps it up. It's going to agree it's a very powerful improvement methodology. It is an enabling tool, as I mentioned before, to apply lean thinking. And as I mentioned several times during this webinar, just a powerful collaboration tool. And if used properly, we can over time realize breakthrough results. So if you're interested in more information, the complete lean enterprise, as Judy had mentioned, is the value stream mapping for office and services. I also have value stream mapping for lean development for those of you in like the engineering, design, product development, the very complex systems. And then there's some other books on the screen. So that's it for me. Judy, any questions?
Thanks, Drew. We do have one. And again, if you have questions, please do enter them into the attendee panel on the right side of your screen and click submit. The first question we have right now is a request if you could talk more about show and tell.
Yeah, so, you know, I've actually tested this on occasion, maybe for fun, but if you describe what you're doing, the work that you do, just verbally, and then you kind of test people's understanding of that in a group, you'll get very different responses, very different understandings. But if you show people what you're doing, you show the screens, you show the forms that you're using, we actually have people do the work and during the mapping event. And you can do that if the work is like minutes. If the work is hours at each step, you can't do that. But we still have people walk us through. Here's the tools I use. Here's the spreadsheet I use. And for example, 2 weeks ago, there was a gentleman who's like, I don't see the need to do that. I was like, just humor me. And as I expected, just tremendous, robust conversation because you're engaging your people's eyes and they see things and they ask questions like, what was that? And what was this? And oh, can you go back to that? And it just generates a lot more robust discussions and which really means much more richer learning of the team members when we're doing the current state walkthrough. So to do that, you have to do some preparations. Can we actually go see in people's offices and cubicles? If so, really no preparations needed. If we can't do that, which happens sometimes, particularly in large institutions, so we are going to do the show and tell in a conference room, but we still might walk the flow a bit just to see where these activities are performed and the environment, the work environment. But if we're going to do it in a conference room, some preparations often have to take place so people can get access to their system tools and so they can really show what they do exactly how they normally would do it. Any other questions?
We did have a question asking if the webinar recording will be distributed to attendees. Yes, it will. And that appears to be our last question today. So thank you, Drew, for a great presentation.
Remarkable.
And this will bring our webinar to a close today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.
No question.